Hi, my name is Ben Meekins from the Prashant Kamat Group at the University of Notre Dame, and I'd like to talk to you about a paper we recently published in the Journal of Physical Chemistry Letters entitled The Role of the Water Oxidation Catalyst Iridium Dioxide in Shuttling Photogenerated Holes Across a Titanium Dioxide Interface. I'd like to start out by discussing some of the key findings from our paper. First, iridium dioxide is a water oxidation co-catalyst that's been well studied in literature, and we determined that it does in fact play an important role in mediating the whole transfer process of a UV irradiated TiO2 system. We were able to use spectroscopic identification of trapped holes to characterize them in the colloidal TiO2 suspension and, more importantly, monitor their transfer to iridium dioxide. We were also able to titrate these trapped holes with potassium iodide to yield an estimate of about 3 holes per particle generated during 7 minutes of UV irradiation of the TiO2 suspension in ethanol containing 5% acetic acid. This also allowed us to determine an extinction coefficient of 11,230 per molar per centimeter at 360 nanometers, which corresponds to the absorbance of the trapped holes. We also found that the hole transfer to iridium dioxide occurs with a rate constant of about 6 times 10 to the 5th per second. And lastly, we were able to determine a mechanism that suggests that iridium oxide catalyzes the recombination of trapped holes with reduced oxygen species. And this mechanism has important implications as it relates to photocatalytic water splitting systems. On this slide, you can see 3 traces that correspond to the titanium dioxide colloidal solution under different conditions. Trace A is a 16 millimolar TiO2 colloidal solution in 5% acetic acid, 95% ethanol after illumination under a nitrogen atmosphere. You can clearly see the very broad visible and infrared region absorption that's classically assigned to trapped electrons on TiO2, but you can also see a very strong absorption in the UV, and it becomes clear as you go from trace A to trace B that these are attributable to the trapped holes on TiO2. The trapped holes are interestingly stable in air, which is somewhat unusual but also very important for this study. And you can see in trace C the more traditional trapped electron peak that is generated in the 16 millimolar TiO2 colloidal solution that's only in ethanol. The acetic acid is what facilitates the trapping of the holes in the TiO2, so you'll see that in all our solutions throughout. On this slide, you can see in the figure on the left traces A, B, and C that correspond to 2, 6, and 10 minutes of illumination of the TiO2 colloidal suspension in acetic acid and ethanol. In the figure on the right, figure B, you can see what happens when iridium dioxide is added and the solution is irradiated yet again. Without iridium dioxide, the trapped hole absorbance peak will continue to grow. However, once the iridium dioxide is added, the peak quickly decreases and eventually reaches a point where it reaches an equilibrium. This suggests that the decrease in absorbance is due to the trapped holes being scavenged by oxygen radicals in the presence of iridium dioxide. So what is the mechanism as suggested by the experiments? Under nitrogen, you don't have any oxygen available to scavenge the electrons, and thus you can't scavenge the trapped holes either. This results in the trace that was seen in A in the very first slide, where you have an absorbance characteristic of both trapped electrons and trapped holes. Under oxygen, however, oxygen can scavenge the electrons that are trapped on the titanium dioxide, and the newly formed oxygen radicals are able to scavenge the trapped holes as well when iridium dioxide is present. This is suggested by the trace showing the decrease of absorbance upon irradiation seen in the previous slides. So what does it mean? Essentially, it means that photocatalytic water splitting with iridium dioxide as the water oxidation catalyst could be hindered by this unexpected and undesirable side reaction. And this is unfortunate, as iridium dioxide thus far has proven to have the lowest overpotential and thus the best promise for water oxidation systems. For a pure photo-driven water splitting setup to be viable, it will be necessary to separate photogenerated electrons quickly to prevent scavenging by oxygen. One way that we found to get around this is to use what we call a reverse fuel cell, which separates the working electrode where the oxygen is produced and the counter electrode where the hydrogen is produced with the membrane. This facilitates both charge separation and removes the gas separation step, as both of the gases are generated in separate compartments. You can see here a schematic of our reverse fuel cell, and the takeaway message from this is that the oxygen and the hydrogen are generated on separate sides of the cell in separate compartments, and a Nafion membrane keeps those two separated. This allows what functionally amounts to pre-separation of the gases and also facilitates the separation of the charges, which should eliminate the side reaction. I'd like to thank you for watching today, and you can find this work in the Journal of Physical Chemistry Letters at the address given below. If you'd like more information on the CMOT group, I'd invite you to go to www.nd.edu/pcomot.